Kwe Kijimanadu, Wamsi, Indigenous Makwan Dodam, Shabata Bajwan, First Nation Indigeba, Chimigwech Nibi, Chimigwech Jojo Aki, Chimigwech to all the life on the land and all the life in the waters. And for their voices, their clear voices when we are prepared to listen, and for the nourishment that comes from the land and comes from the water, that not only nourishes our bodies, but it nourishes our hearts and our spirits. And I think those spirits who spoke with my friends and I in our recent hunt and reminded us of what was the real world, of why we need to address things like climate change and biodiversity loss, and that it won't happen. It won't happen just through science. That those species and their ancestors have had a relationship with us for thousands of years, and that relationship is crucial to our well-being, to living in Algonquin. We say, "Mino Pimaraziwan," the good life. And the good life comes when we connect, in a wholesome way, when we sing our songs, when we express our gratitude, when we engage in reciprocity. In fact, when the world learns to practice reciprocity and gratitude on a daily basis, the door will be open to sustainability, to that good life. And until we do that, till we do those simple things, till we honor the life in all beings, until we dismiss an anthropocentric view that we are more important, that we are better, until we reconcile our relationship with those plants, with those animals that are so beautiful and so amazing, then we will struggle. We'll struggle to achieve goals, global goals, to heal the land. It just won't happen. We have to get back to sharing and practicing our relationships with all of life, and honoring and respecting and knowing the primacy of those relationships in the priorities that we set, that they come first. And in order to honor our first responsibility to the continuation of life, we have to return to listening to the voices of the land and the water. And so my brothers and our families came together in the hunt, and it was more than hunting, sitting on the land, watching squirrels, owls, trumpeter swans, geese, all kinds of ducks, all kinds of birds, and the trees, the majestic trees. I saw some old growth cedar. I've lived here 50 years. I'd never seen them before. They're just majestic. And so I say Chimigwech from my experience, but for the experience that we all have, and the opportunity we all have to connect with that life and be governed by that life. And so when we came together in 1764, though there was some ugly parts to it, there was also ceremony. And what we learned in Pathways 1 was how important that ceremony was, and to coming up with the vision that we shared with the territories, the provinces, the nation, and that the importance of Indigenous leadership, the importance of passing on what our ancestors have communicated to us, not only our human ancestors, but the ancestors of the trees, the ancestors of other plants, the ancestors of the animals. And so with that, I open the session. I thank each and every one of you who have joined the circle, and is always the case with Kijimanadu, our great spirit. The creative possibilities are endless as we join our hearts and minds in talking about IPCAs. So Chimigwech.
Miigwech, Elder Larry, thank you very much for those words and for reminding us all what we're here and what our collective work is about. Very much appreciated. So welcome everyone to the final dialogue of 2020 of the Virtual Campfire Series. We've titled it Ask Us Anything. So I guess that's the point of the dialogue today, is to truly ask us everything. My name is Robin Roth. I'm an associate professor of geography at the University of Guelph. I'm a principal investigator on the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, and I co-lead it with some of the wonderful people here on the call today. So it's my pleasure to moderate the discussion today. The CRP and the IISAAK OLAM Foundation and the West Coast Environmental Law have been hosting 2 webinar streams this past fall, one on governance and one on legal innovations in Indigenous protected and conserved areas, or IPCAs. So on behalf of CRP and our partners, thank you for all the speakers who joined us in the fall and for all of you who attended those sessions. And it really made those last 6 webinars possible. And many of whom, of course, are joining us here today to answer your questions and to engage in dialogue. We're really lucky to have all of you with us today and to share this time together and to really kind of think about all of the ways that we can catalyze and enliven the work that all of you are doing. So I also want to thank Allison Bishop and Justine Townsend, Monica Shore and Georgia Lloyd Brown for doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make all of those webinars possible and today's session possible as well. So this one's going to be a bit different. We don't have any planned presentations. We're just here to answer questions. There's been 14 or 15 already submitted that we have on deck, and I would ask you to use the chat to continue to ask questions. We're sort of filing them in the background there. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And then I will also pause a number of times and ask if there's anyone who'd prefer to ask the question by unmuting themselves. So you'll have that opportunity as well if you don't want to type. And I would just ask, because we have such a large panel of experts today, that for anyone who wants to answer the question, to use the hand thing if you can, or to indicate to me. I can't see all of you at once, so either indicate in the chat, call me if you want, or put up that hand and I'll try to get to you and make sure that you have that opportunity to reflect on the question. But I think the idea is just to have the panelists kind of dialogue and talk amongst themselves about the answers and see kind of what emerges. I think that's all I need to say at the beginning here. So I want to turn it over to Larry first to kind of introduce himself formally, and then we'll go through the list of those of you who are on the call on the expert panel. I think there's some names here that they're hoping to come, or they can maybe only come for part of it. But if you are on the call, we'll start at the top of the list for sake of simplicity and work our way down and see if everyone could do a quick introduction of themselves so that all the folks on the call know who's here and who's able to answer questions. And I also think that there's probably plenty of people on the call who aren't on this list who might also have things to say. So again, just use that hand raising mechanism if you can. Elder Larry, I turn it over to you.
Miigwech, Robin. I'm just going to say in terms of this process, I'm probably, I'm down to one hand. I just had surgery. So jumping on chats and things like that, I probably won't do today, but when I look at the roster on the expert panel, I know it's going to be well covered. What I wanted to say as part of the introduction is what preceded this process, which was Pathways 1, the fact that we negotiated a co-governance model, a shared governance model that acknowledged Indigenous oral knowledge transfer as well as Western written knowledge transfer. And we accepted, there were some equivalencies. For example, there was the smudge and the gavel. There was the 7 gifts, the 7 laws, the grandfather laws, and Robert's Rules of Order, for example. And we opened our meetings and closed our meetings in ceremony. And when we transferred over the reports, we rise together from the Indigenous Circle of Experts and from the National Advisory Panel, Canada's Conservation Vision. We did so in ceremony, in pipe ceremony. And we did gift giving. We explained the deeper meaning of gift giving. And so there was an acknowledgement of the legal systems that formed our relationship at the Treaty of Niagara in 1764. There was a recognition that we'd lost our way, I would argue, in 1815 with the Treaty of Ghent, and that part of reconciliation was to return to the strength of our knowledge transfer systems, our knowledge systems, our laws, and to deal with the challenges of, well, Pathways 1 flows under the Convention on Biological Diversity, a global treaty, but also is tied at the hip with the Convention on Climate Change. In fact, they were given birth in 1992 in Rio. I had the great opportunity to be there with some pretty awesome elders at that time. But where I pinch myself is that in that ceremony, we sang our songs, we expressed our legal obligations, responsibilities, and we shared the foundations of who we are. And what was supposed to happen in 1764 is that we were supposed to polish that bundle in perpetuity, and that we were supposed to develop a greater understanding of the strengths that we brought to the relationship in sharing this land and in accepting the responsibility for future generations. But we lost our way, and now to have negotiated a process like this, to me, was amazing and encouraging. Yes, of course, there's a lot more work to be done. And then in this Fireside series, some great topics, great speakers. And so we work to build that, what I call cultural literacy, cross-cultural literacy, and it's desperately needed. I was on a call with Dan Longboat yesterday with a major foundation, a few calls actually, and this whole issue of understanding our shared history. How did we get here is still very weak, very fragile. And so this series, in my view, has done much to address that vacuum. And in that vacuum flows racism, flows egregious relationships with Indigenous women and girls, flows the destruction of the land. And we were just talking about UNDRIP discussion in Parliament, and we do have a Parliament, a leader of one of the parties who says he would throw out UNDRIP, a minimum standard for the survival of Indigenous peoples of the world. So there are big challenges, but I say I'm going to endorse what Robin has said about all the work, all the contributions to this process. And with that, I look forward to the questions. I'm sure they'll be great. And this panel, I know, will have lots of answers. So back to you, Robin.
Great, thanks. It's a wonderful list of people here. So we're going to quickly, if folks can start, I'll maybe call out names, and if you can make sure your camera's on if you're able to do that, or if you wish to do that, and just a couple of words about your role so far and what you're happy to answer questions about, that would be great. So I believe Marilyn Baptiste is on the call.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's Marilyn Baptiste. I'm with Tycote Inn, one of the 6 communities, Interior BC. I'm part of the CRP group, and look forward to questions, although beware, I'm only on until 10:30 about, unless my other meeting doesn't start. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Marilyn. And when she means part of the CRP group, she co-leads the CRP with a number of us. Is Johnny on the call? Sorry, I'm not able to tell if everyone's joined yet. So. Okay, we'll go to John Burrows. I know you're there.
Yep, John Burrows, Canada Research Chair from the University of Victoria. And I'm grateful for the opportunity just to be part of this group today.
Thank you, John. And thanks for being here. I know we're all busy. everyone here has taken some time out of busy schedules to come, so I really appreciate that. Amy Kraft, have you joined? I'm not sure if she was able to. Okay, Eli.
Good morning, folks. Eli Enns from Cloquet on the west coast of Vancouver Island on my dad's side, and Winnipeg, Manitoba on my mom's side, and a member of the leadership circle for the CRP and president of the IISAAK OLAM Foundation. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Eli. Claire Hutton, I know I saw you on there.
Good morning. My name is Claire Hutton and I work for Nature United, and we're a Canadian conservation organization that supports the authority of Indigenous peoples to manage lands and waters. We work in partnership to support Indigenous protected areas and also do quite a bit of work in support of Indigenous guardians. So looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Claire. Noella Gray, are you on the call? No. So I'm going to be kind of vicious on the speed at which you can unmute yourself. So if you are and I move on too quickly, let me know. Is Joe Copper-Jack on the call?
I see Joe Jack.
You see Joe Jack? Excellent.
Yeah, but he's muted. Do you want to introduce yourself, sir?
Okay, good morning, Copper-Jack. I'm very glad to be here, and that I'm just open to questions in regards to that land relationship model that I presented here on October 22nd. And any feedback too that those people who are online would be most welcome. Kunishish, and look forward to that discussion.
Thank you so much. And Georgia Lloyd-Smith, I know you're on.
Hi, everyone. My name is Georgia Lloyd-Smith. I'm a lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law and work on Indigenous protected areas and coastal and marine law issues. Super happy to answer questions, and thanks everyone for putting this on.
Thank you, Georgia. And Elder Albert.
Yes, Albert Marshall here from Migamurgy. I reside in Niskasoni, and I am with the Collaborative Environmental Planning Initiative as a conduit for the knowledge orders of this land.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Albert. And of course, you're a member of the Elders Lodge and provide us great guidance every day on two-eyed seeing and all the rest of your experience and knowledge. So thank you very much for making the time to come today, Elder Albert. Is Monica Mulrennan on the call? No, not yet. Stephen Nita. Sorry, I'm doing this very linearly, but it's the only way I could keep it organized.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Nita. I'm calling from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to see all those questions. I would just make one statement. The IPCAs are a fairly new construct. There's no hard and fast rule as to what it is and what it could be, and who you should partner with and whose legislation you should be using. Those are absolutely up to the nations and communities that are advancing IPCAs to determine those things. I think we could speak to examples of what they are to date, but encourage everyone here to understand that this is a little bit freedom here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And Stephen's also a co-lead on the CRP. Rayanna, you can see people wear many hats. It might not be the biggest hat they wear. So, and is Rayanna Seymour-Huri on the call?
Yeah, hi. My name is Rayanna Seymour. I'm a staff lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law and also the RE-Law Manager, which stands for Revitalizing Indigenous Law for Land, Air, and Water. Georgia is also part of that program. And yeah, at West Coast Environmental Law, and I'm a Anishinaabe from Treaty 3 territory.
Great, thank you, welcome. And Lisa Young.
Hey everyone, I'm Lisa Young. I'm the Executive Director for the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, which is a resource management organization based out of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And UINR, along with a few other Indigenous organizations across Nova Scotia, were advising the Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq chiefs on creation of IPCAs. And I'm also part of the leadership circle.
Excellent, thank you. I've been told that Russ Ross from Dasyko Tribal Park will be able to join us later. And then is Chuma Young from Cape Breton University online? Not yet. Okay, excellent. So we have a great selection of folks here with a wide range of experience and knowledge, and even more on the call probably. So let's get started. I think we can, I'm gonna pull up a few questions that were posed when people registered, and then we'll turn it over to folks who wanna take a stab at it. So I'm gonna start with a few governance questions because these seem to be top of mind for a lot of people. And so the first one was, what roles have the federal and provincial government played in IPCA development? Oh, and there's also a poll that's just being released. If you can take the time to answer that before the end of the call, that would be great. Just so we
Can
get
I
a
take
sense
a
of
stab at that?
Yeah, you can take a stab at that, Eli, and then we'll open it up and see who else.
Yeah, in his opening comments, Elder Larry McDermott mentioned the Pathway to Canada Target 1. And as he mentioned, that was a bit of a novel experience. I mean, maybe not completely unheard of in Canadian government, but the Minister of Environment for the federal government, as well as Ministers of Environment from federal and provincial and territorial governments came together to create a national steering committee to achieve what they call Target 1, which is Aichi Target 11, the 17% commitment for the 2020 December 31st deadline. And so the role of provinces and territorial governments is that they participated in this national initiative, but they themselves, and by the way, they, through the Indigenous Circle of Experts, the title of that committee was a little misleading because it wasn't just Indigenous peoples on that committee. There was also representatives from the government of Nova Scotia, the government of Ontario, Alberta, of course, as the co-lead on the National Steering Committee, the province of British Columbia, the Northwest Territories, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Parks Canada. I mean, there was a broad involvement, and so as Mr. Nita has said on many occasions, that all of our recommendations and our process of producing that report involved active dialogue with that diverse committee. But at the end of the day, we we held fast on the Indigenous-led piece. That, and by the way, this was this was a lengthy dialogue about just that lead, LED. Add that on to Indigenous, and in the final days. And it's great to have Eduardo Souza on the call here because he was the lion tamer and cat herder in producing that final report, and can probably remember very well the conversation that I'm speaking of. That we fought to keep that lead piece in there, and this isn't a commentary on the provinces and the territories. I think everyone in the room agreed that this is the place for Indigenous leadership to happen. But there was acknowledgement that there may be reluctance with some of the other, I suppose just a fear factor of, okay, if we say this is Indigenous-led, what does that mean? And there's that sort of uncertainty. And so we've really stuck to our guns on that one. And so I'll be quiet on that now.
Great, thanks. Is there anyone else on the call that want to comment on the role of provincial and federal governments in IPCA development?
I could add a little piece to that, I guess. It's entirely up to the nations that are advancing IPCs under their own authority and legal systems. If they want to partner with a Crown government, for whatever reason, they could find a Crown partner if there's a willing Crown partner there. In other places, it could be that you're working with a provincial or a territorial jurisdiction to create the right legal instruments that the nation can use, like we did in Northwest Territories, where we helped create the Territorial Protected Area Act. the enabling legislation that defines what an IPCA could look like in Northwest Territories. There may be a need soon where federal government uses some type of designation to recognize IPCAs. That's not there yet, but there's a number of instruments that can be used through the UN process that describes the different types of protected or conserved areas that qualifies towards the IUG target of 17% by the end of 2020. And there's discussions that's ongoing now at the UN level that will set the targets for the next targets. I think there's talk about 30% by 2030 and the type of conditions that they should have to get these areas recognized by the UN that a country would put forward as their contribution to their commitments. Thank you.
Hey, Robin, one more thing on that. In our cover letter, Danica Littlechild and myself co-authored a cover letter to deliver the ICE report. And in that cover letter, we urged the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to strike up internal appropriate recognition task force within their own government. Because, you know, Suna mentions recognition from Crown governments, and we all know that sometimes there's strings attached to that. And so there's a difference between appropriate recognition of Indigenous leadership and recognition. So that was said in the cover letter, and we urged them to strike up that internal task force for appropriate recognition, so that when First Nations, Métis, and Inuit come forward and self-identify, self-determine IPCAs, that the Crown government has something plausible to say in response, rather than yay or nay. You know, we're not talking about Caesar here. This is Indigenous leadership to do this, and they have a choice to make to reflect that self-determination.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Robin, just something maybe to add on the concept of Indigenous-led. But back to what Stephen was saying, how it really depends on the community and their aspirations and what they're looking for. Just as an example, just within Nova Scotia alone, we put forward initially 7 potential areas for IPCAs. And we did partner with the province on that submission, but that was our decision to make, that we decided to do that strategically in order to get funds. But as each individual IPCA is being developed, even within Nova Scotia, there's a different approach taken almost for each individual IPCA, and it's totally led by that community. For example, the Glooscap Cave was already a designated wilderness area, was already on the kind of table to be like co-managed with the Mi'kmaq. We're working towards that. There's other examples, and I see that Allison was on the call. She's one of our colleagues we work with in Nova Scotia. Eskasoni is pursuing their own IPCA, and they're taking a different approach where they want to be totally responsible to take on that responsibility for managing that IPCA independently. So just within even Nova Scotia, there's different relationships, models that are being developed with the province and on how those are going to be managed. So it's, in that way, it is Indigenous-led in that the communities need to decide. They make the final decision on the approach that they're going to take. And in my mind, that's how we're kind of talking about what does it mean to be Indigenous-led. It doesn't mean that you're solely responsible. It could, but it basically means that you're the communities decide on what approach to take and what's acceptable and what level of partnerships they want, right?
Marilyn Baptiste, did you have something to add there too? No, I thought I saw her talk. Lisa, quickly, can I ask you, what in the ones where you have partnered with Crown governments, what role have the Crown governments played?
Well, the one that I can only speak to, the one that we're working on currently, and actually my IPCA manager, I know she's didn't want to be put on the spot, but she's on the call too, program manager. But we're actually working very closely with the province on developing a framework for the management of the wilderness area. But they also have stepped in and helped us a lot in securing some private land that is adjacent to that property, that wilderness area that we're trying to, they're being really loud in my hallway, that they're trying to acquire. And they've been really, really great in assisting us in negotiating that property and giving us some guidance because they've have experience in acquiring land. So we've developed a close partnership with them in supporting and developing this IPCA. Like I said, where others, they're going to look a lot different. So on the mainland, there's 5 different areas that have been identified, and CMM has taken the approach where for each parcel, they've kind of putting together an advisory committee that's going to kind of assess that and see, well, what is it they want? And the community members that are on part of those advisory groups, they're going to determine what the relationship they want or what assistance they want from the government and the province, and what partnerships or potentially could be. I know it's one of the questions about municipalities. Is that an option or different groups? I think it'd be up to them to determine what that partnership's going to look like and what that management approach is going to be. It's going to be probably different for each parcel.
Yeah.
Hey, Robin, I see a question here about the role of municipalities, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with Larry on the drive back from Canmore, Larry, when we drove all the way to Tofino. Do you mind if we interweave that one? Because it's absolutely connected to the role of provinces and territories. In Canada, there's been Canada started out as a highly centralized federal state with power in Ottawa. And as the population has grown in other parts of the country, there's been a slow sequestering away of jurisdiction and powers and authorities by provinces. And I see that decentralization of power and authority has continued. And an observation that Larry and I were talking about, how provinces in some cases, not in all cases, are failing not only to maintain healthy relationships with Indigenous peoples, but they're also failing their own municipalities. Larry, do you remember this conversation? There's a fiduciary responsibility that arises out of the fact that municipalities are created through acts of provincial legislation, except for those rare cities that originated before provincial powers were established. I know there's unique situations here and there, but by and large, that fiduciary responsibility stands from provinces to municipalities. Now, in the case of the Mears Island Tribal Park, the province issued industrial forestry permits in a watershed that provided water to its own municipality, therefore failing in its fiduciary responsibility to its own legal child. The municipality of Tofino is a legal child of the province of British Columbia. And so Tlaoquiet Nation, which has constitutional agency, stepped in with a firm but loving hand in 1984 to stop that activity dead in its tracks and exercise fiduciary responsibility over the municipality of Tofino. And because even though we've dealt with ebbs and flows of racism and other problems in our territory, that commitment to the overall health and well-being of our territory, including the municipality of Tofino, has paid off, in spades, and this can be the case if we can cultivate strong relationships with local governments. And I know it's easier said than done, 1,000,000%. My point here is that provinces are failing in some key ways the general populations, and I foresee a continued decentralization of power and authority. I don't know, Larry, if you want to comment on that conversation.
Yeah, it's a good one, Eli. I'm a little reluctant to get into it too far, but I'm thinking of in Lanark County, where I'm located, a woman was elected warden yesterday, and I worked with her. She's a mayor, and I worked with her on a land acknowledgement / commitment that acknowledges the egregious chapters of our past, but commits Indigenous peoples and peoples of her municipality to care for the land, to work together. And so things can be done, positions taken regardless of the structure. And we actually have a weak mayor system is what it's referred to, but it's as you've said, municipalities are at the, they fall under provinces and they can be evaporated if a province wants to. I'll wrap it up by saying this. In Toronto, you've got 4 or 5 mayors that have come together and said, enough's enough. We're going to exert our, I'm going to paraphrase, sovereignty. So yeah, it shows ultimately that people can come together, and if they're principled, they can do things regardless of what I would say is the legal architecture of government relationships.
Thanks. I think that covers municipalities a bit as well. So I want to move on to a couple of legal questions and establishment questions that have been asked in the chat thus far. So Luis asks, how can we encourage provinces to pass legislation to allow IPCAs to be established? For example, in Newfoundland and Labrador, there isn't any legislation to start the process. Someone from Ontario chimed in similarly. And then there's also a question that I think is related, perhaps, the reluctance to support IPCAs in the province of BC. So I don't know if any of the legal experts on the call, Rihanna or John or Georgia, want to take a stab at one of those questions.
I can maybe say that there's an educational dimension to any law that you hope to see put in place. And so creating that ground of understanding with the communities that would be living with those in relationship to the IPCs is huge. And then of course, there's all of the need to not just walk one path with that, but diversify your portfolio. One of the things that happened in the United States over the past 40 years is most legislation there is passed with the support of Indigenous peoples, because it doesn't necessarily fall into a Republican or a Democratic camp. In other words, Indigenous peoples there work with Republicans, they work with Democrats, they are willing to sometimes cross partisan lines, because it's not really about being liberal or conservative for them. It's about being activated around the issue that's most important to them. Now that's hard for some of us to live with, I appreciate, and not all of us will want to walk down that path. But for some, that might be an aspect of the passage of legislation. And of course, getting your hand involved with that legislation as well, like making it, putting forward a private member's bill that might be making its way into the government agenda down the road. There's so much more to say about that, but that's just a few ideas.
John. Oh, Albert has something to add, yeah?
Yeah, I'm just wondering now, when do we get into this conversation, whoever it may be, municipal, provincial, or otherwise? If a decision is rendered against the contrary to the principles of IPCA, what recourse do we really have? And would it be important at this juncture to discuss what that recourse could be at this point in time?
Mm-hmm.
Stephen?
If I could add to that, the biggest conflict between Indigenous peoples and nations and governments and crown and public governments is jurisdictional issues. As Indigenous people, we know we didn't give up our jurisdiction. Many of us have treaties where we agreed to share our jurisdiction with settler societies as represented by public governments and crown governments. Today is a good day to have this discussion. UNDRIP has introduced the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, rights of Indigenous peoples. To me, the IPCAs is a two-pronged opportunity. On one hand, Canada has asked Indigenous peoples, what conditions would you like to see in your relationship with crown governments to advance Indigenous protected and conserved areas within our traditional territories or within our territories that can help Canada meet its international commitments under the Ipca Accord, which the ICE report specifically speaks to. Canada is going to agree to another international treaty to set more targets, bigger targets. 30% is what I'm hearing. So that's the one hand. On the other hand, it's an opportunity for Indigenous people to express in a real way their authority and responsibilities to their territories. And that's, that's the first step, is that expression. Creating an IPCA or declaring an IPCA is an expression of reassuming your responsibilities to your territories. Mm-hmm. Defining what that looks like is an exercise to me through a community dialogue, where that dialogue will be part of the healing of the traumatic impacts of the assimilation policies in our communities. So I think you need to take the time to really discuss it at the community level, why you're doing it, what can be done to help the community and individuals within the community to heal from the impacts of colonialism and assimilation policy. And once you define your IPCAs, you can determine what's needed. We did that in our community of IISAAK. It's a community of 300 people, isolated community on the east arm of the Great Slave Lake. We got instructions from our elders to protect the heart of our homeland. So we went and explored best practices and worked with the elders to define an area. So they drew a map for us and gave us a mandate to protect it using the Treaty of 1900, also known as Treaty Number 8, Northwest Territories, and go make a deal with Canada for several reasons why we chose Canada. We have a treaty with Canada. The size of our area of interest was 33,000 square kilometers. So it's a huge territory. And without legislation that's respected by industry and territorial governments, it would be difficult to manage such an area by our own. Parks Canada is also a great promoter for tourism. We wanted to create a tourism economy for our community. That's another reason why we chose Parks Canada. And that's how we came to decide who our partner should be. It was only after we did all the legwork of at the community level and deciding if we wanted an IPCA. We didn't even know it was called an IPCA at that time. It was just, we need to protect the heart of our homeland. That was the mandate. So in a lot of ways, Thaitinen helped define what IPCAs could be, but it's definitely not the only road. Thank you.
Robin, you're muted there.
Sorry, go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the danger of waiting for provinces to make legislation is we're actually giving up the lead part, the Indigenous-led part. In Stephen's case, they found a healthy way to think about that in terms of giving life to the Peace and Friendship Treaty of 1900, whereas the Northwest territorial government for the devolution received that I guess sovereign mandate from the federal crown. But anyways, here in British Columbia and some of the other southern provinces, it's a bit risky. I mean, look at what happened in Ontario with the last government. I remember hearing people just brokenhearted about all the progress they had made under the previous government, the Liberal government there, and then all of that got thrown out when Doug Ford's government came in. And so some people felt they had just wasted 4 years of their lives. And so you can have a really nice process with the province, and you can get all the way to a certain place, and it can all become undone. And we've seen this time and time again. And so in this situation, the best analogy I can think of is a, you know, in a dance, who's going to take the first step, you know, and then, so if through, you know, and I'm happy Georgia Lloyd-Smith is on here because she's talked often about how Indigenous law has to be the foundation of an IPCA. We have to know who we are. We have to exercise our own governance and jurisdiction. And then through Section 35, and John, I'm riffing off John Burroughs. I'm kind of riffing off something you said in Banff about Section 35 of the Canada Act of 1982, acting as a bridge between Indigenous law and Crown law. So through that bridge of Section 35, the IPCA first step in the dance, so to speak, is taken, and then other levels of Crown government have an opportunity to respond. Jack Woodward, who was our lawyer for the Mears Island court case 35 years ago, and who's become a prominent, Native law lawyer, Aboriginal law lawyer, he said in an interview that the best way for, you know, average Canadian to think about an IPCA or a tribal park is to think of it as a constitutional park, because we're exercising constitutional agency. And I would really love to hear John's or anyone else's thought, maybe Georgia, about that bridge through Section 35 and about the unfinished business of what are the parameters and implications of Section 35 on other levels of jurisdiction in Canada. I'm not old enough to have said I saw it on the news myself. I'm a young whippersnapper, but you know, my understanding is after Section 35 was entrenched in the domestication of the Constitution in 1982, that there was supposed to be some more talk that happened about Section 35, and this is another thing we're kind of playing footsies with in this process. And now they're introducing a new process to talk about UNDRIP, whereas there's still these unfinished conversations that we need to have.
Georgia, did you want to chime in, or John?
Georgia, I see Larry nodding away too.
Well, I can say that the framework of Section 35 is reconciliation. The court says that's the goal of that provision. The methodology is that a morally and politically defensible conception of these rights should incorporate both the common law and the Indigenous legal perspectives. And so the court calls this a bridge. They call this an intersocietal law, that is law that's made between societies. And so what the important piece is here is that when Section 35 is operational, it has to incorporate our own laws. It has to use those as standards for judgment, criteria, processes, precedents, guideposts, signposts. It is our own. So we need to fill that space with our own laws so that we're not judged by just the common law or the imperial law, but you know, like when we entered into our treaties, the idea is that we wouldn't just be judged by you know, what the Crown brought, but we would introduce them into our legal order and invite them to live in accordance with our understandings of what is orderly and peaceful and related to the earth in those spaces. And so for me, that's the methodology of Section 35.1, which is a morally and politically defensible conception of these rights, incorporates our and these other perspectives.
Albert's putting up his hand there.
Yeah.
Elder Albert, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm still not hearing what recourse do we really have in the event if there's a decision made on this IPCA area contrary to the principles of IPCA. I'm still not hearing what legal, constitutionally, or legal recourse can we take. I know we have our own laws, but I mean, you know, how can they be used against any of their laws?
Well, that's a great question, because there's so many different possible recourses. You know, the Anishinaabe have these 7 grandmother and grandfather teachings, which are about love and humility and wisdom and courage and honesty and respect and wisdom. And so one recourse is to love those folks, to be courageous with them, to find the path of wisdom and truth. And And that is necessary, I think, to build relations with others. Of course, you can go to court, you can get an injunction, you can bring an action that shows that there's a breach of what they promised to do. You can find ways where you economically initiate possibilities that would challenge the sort of the way that they're relating to that territory. In other words, finding remedy is about finding different pathways for recourse, because no one ever listens to just one way of being told to what they should do. It's intersectional, it's multifaceted. That is, we are persuaded not by just one thing, we're persuaded by many things. And in terms of force, if you want to force another party to do something, the law does arise there to bring injunctions, to find breaches. But ultimately, even after the force of the case is over, you're left with relationality and persuasion and deliberation, because force or compulsion, while it can carry you some distance, is not a way that law can be built over a longer period, which is why I love our laws, because they try to take us out of the realm of force and coercion and compulsion and into the realm of trying to find pathways that we can walk together with peace and friendship and respect, and to learn from each other and have this two-eyed seeing. And so the recourse is multi-dimensional and is real on the breaches and the injunctions, but is also real on the love and the teaching, and then the gentle correction, as well as the standing on the blockade, as the case might be.
Thanks, Stephen.
I think that's a great answer, John. You have the Section 35 rights to fall back on anytime you define what your territory should be used for. But on the other hand, there's also danger if Indigenous nations are not exercising responsibility. The declaration of IPCA is done with great respect and responsibility. It shouldn't be done frivolously or for political reasons. For an example, because you don't agree to a right of way of a pipeline, you don't declare an Indigenous protected conserved area right in front of it, unless you've done it way beforehand, because it does have an impact on other Indigenous governments' initiatives as well. So there's declaring Indigenous protected and conserved areas should be done with great respect and responsibility in mind. And one of the ways, there's one question that speaks to hunting rights by non-Indigenous peoples within IPCAs. I spoke earlier about the need to use IPCAs to assume responsibility, and that includes old protocols and laws. For an example, in Indigenous culture, when one Indigenous nation wants to go harvest in another Indigenous nation's territories, protocol dictate that they went and sought permission. Permissions are hardly ever denied, but there's usually protocols that are associated with people on the territory. Here in the Northwest Territories, my community is trying to reintroduce that. And within the agreements, the legal contractual agreements we negotiated with Parks Canada and the Northwest Territories government, for an example, we speak about the boundaries of Thaidjan not having not being recognized for the purpose of exercise of Section 35 rights. So anybody with Section 35 rights is able to exercise those rights within Thaidjan. But what we do say is that we want you to come talk to your leadership as part of the protocol and follow our rules when you're doing that. And that's on one hand. On another hand, we do work with the government of Northwest Territories, for an example, where we have an agreement that states that Parks Canada and the government of Northwest Territories and even our people can't get together and create rules and regulations born right from the Thaidjan itself. when it comes to rights and the exercise of rights. What we do say is, okay, for example, the Bathurst caribou herd numbers are very, very low. They're in a dangerous position right now from just dying out. So what our leadership decided, okay, we're going to give this herd some time out. We're not going to harvest them, and we don't want anybody in our territory, anybody that has Section 35 rights, to harvest them within our territory, including within inside Union. So what we did was we went and talked to the GWT. We got support from the other First Nations within the region, and together we went to the GWT, and they said, okay, for the purpose of Bathurst, we want you to use your Wildlife Act to exercise this responsibility to protect the Bathurst within our territory. And that's how the leadership within my region is handling this. So it's telling the government, not the government telling them. So every jurisdiction has different relationships. In the Northwest Territories, we're lucky we're 50% of the population, so we can influence that a lot easier. Similarly, I think you could have a similar opportunity in Newfoundland and Labrador. Where there's a question that's there, where there's no legislation. Great, you got a blank canvas. You use your political and just constitutional relationship with the Newfoundland government. Ask Canada to support you if need be, but see what you can do to help them write a piece of legislation that can support IPCAs.
Thanks, Stephen. We're going to head towards planning questions as a segue, but Eli has some things to add, I believe.
Yeah, this reminds me of a conversation that I bared witness to in California at the, I believe it is 2010 Katoomba Group meeting in Palo Alto, California, on paying Poseidon and the emergence of blue carbon and marine ecosystem services as a value to the economy. And there was a group of lawyers, California-based lawyers at the gathering, who were lamenting about the fact that they had some of the best environmental legislation in the country, if not the world, but it wasn't doing its job. It wasn't doing its job because corporations that violate these environmental laws day in and day out walk an interesting gambit of adhering to their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to make money for their shareholders, which they have by law have to do, and the cost benefit analysis of adhering to environmental laws. Because if they adhere to the laws, their money income might go down. But if they break those laws, there's a chance they might just get away with it. But if they do get caught and those laws are enforced on them, they might have to pay a fine. And when you do when you work out the numbers, it's more profitable for them to break those laws and pay the fines and keep operating. And so this was a 10-year-old conversation in California, but you know what, I've heard elements of that time and time again. So again, you know, if you want to put all your apples in that cart, all the best, but I don't think it's a good place to invest. And I want to, I want to respond to Albert's question about consequences. And I draw from something that Auntie Lisa Young told me in Montreal last year. Feels like 10 years ago, Lisa, about the prophecy or prediction made by the elders at the time of early contact, early contact in the Eastern Gate, that the observation at the time was that these newcomers have dangerous consumption patterns, that they foresaw that things were going to get pretty bad in terms of environmental crises, and that in the worst hours of that crises, the great-grandchildren of the newcomers will come to our children, and they will ask for help and guidance, and we have to hold on to our teachings, and we're prepared for that. So my answer to the question is what I've sort of distilled from various teachings from elders is that the consequences of failing to respect an IPCA, if it's done well and if it's done in accordance with the local protocols, Indigenous law from that area, and the consequence being more destruction of environment, then this is a violation of natural law, and the consequence of that is suffering for your children and your grandchildren. You won't get a fine in the mail or have to go in and stand in front of a judge and shuffle paperwork around with your lawyer. It's going to be more. It's going to be hurt more than that. It's going to hurt more. It's going to hurt for generations to come, and that's the consequences. And that's yeah. And Larry put his hand up on that. I'll just be quiet. So.
I also have a message. Oh, she just lowered her hand. I had a direct question from someone as well. Larry, did you want to comment quickly on that, or should this next question also has to do with provincial law?
Yeah, I'm going to integrate a little bit of, well, yeah, John said something, responded to the Constitution Act, and I'm thinking about what Eli is saying. So here's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about William Commanda and the Seven Fires Prophecy Belt, and that belt, by the way, in 1982 was shared with Trudeau and the premiers. And what was put in place constitutionally was a set of first ministers' meetings with Indigenous peoples, but they failed. And for a variety of reasons, I'll skip right now. But what elders were saying in 1982 is that there are laws that flow from the land. In other words, and the Seven Prophecies Belt said that we would come to that time that Eli described, and William used to have me speak to that, by the way, to mayors and all kinds of people. But that point that we're in now is where we're faced with that choice of living, listening to the land, living according to natural law, or wavering, pursuing greed, pursuing power, living out of balance. And so part of the prophecy was that Mother Earth, Jojo Aki, has this great power. And that power can come from the smallest organism, a virus, and that power will correct things. And if we don't listen to those messages, natural law, that's where we're all accountable. You can write any law you want. William used to say, man can write all the laws he wants, but if they're not in harmony with natural law, he can destroy himself. Well, that's the ultimate accountability. In answering Albert's question, there's no escaping that accountability. We'll destroy the future for all of our children. It doesn't matter what party you subscribe to, doesn't matter what law is written. There are laws that are part of this creation that we are all, we all draw our breath, we all draw our life from. And so that's why Indigenous peoples are close to those laws. They were close, and they brought them to the table in 1764, and in 2020 they're even more important. So it's a matter of health and well-being for all of us to listen to those laws. And for us, those laws are coming from listening to the land, taking that time and listening to what the land and the water has to tell us. So that's the accountability. And there's no free pass around that. You might buy a little time with a bag full of money, but ultimately it's just committing collective suicide.
Thanks, Elder Larry. We have about an hour, just under an hour left.
Can I add just one example to describe what Larry's talking about? The land tells us the law.
Quickly, yep.
The story of Uncle Sada, the original law physically used to create Taijimanene. This is a story of from the beginning of time, when there was giant beavers and such. The oral history of my people speaks of a time When during the hard times when our leader Dot Cho was chasing 2 giant beavers to harvest, one from east to west, from a lake called Dot Cho Kwe, Artillery Lake in English, down towards the east arm of the Great Slave Lake. About halfway down, they harvested one beaver, and the beaver was shared amongst everyone. An elderly lady who was by herself. Her husband and kids all passed on. She was by herself, and she was having a hard time in life. She got there late, so there wasn't enough to share with her. She wanted some beaver blood. It didn't happen. She was refused. The next day, Dot Cho led his people towards the Great Slave Lake, chasing the second giant beaver. When they got to the Great Slave Lake, which is about 40 kilometers, they realized that the elderly lady wasn't there with him anymore. So they sent 2 young runners back. And when they got to her, she was at the last campsite, and she was sitting there. And she says, "The Creator came to me when I prayed when I communicated with him with all my soul. He came to me and he asked me to sit here and to sit here until the end of time, to provide healing for physical, spiritual, and emotional healing to those that believe in me and to those that respect my territory." So for years, IISAAK has been going back and visiting her and paying homage to her. We have also been fighting against industrial development right on her, where there was proposed hydro dams. This is a huge, perfect area for hydro dams. We've refused $6 billion at one time proposal by the diamond mines. But we've been protecting her and protecting her territory, her watershed, all these years from industrial development. So when the elders said, okay, the pressure is getting too strong, it's going to be difficult to protect. So that's why we created an Indigenous Protected Conserved Areas using our own law, and then invited Crown governments to partner with us. So that's an example of how the land tells you your responsibility, and the laws that you have, inherent laws that you have to use. I just wanted to share that, give life to the words that Larry spoke.
Great, thanks, Stephen. That was a great example. I just wanted to ask Sue Carlick, you have your hand up. Did you want to ask your question now? I believe it had to do with provincial law and UNDRIP and so on.
Yes, thank you. Hi. Just wanted to ask the question, I guess, if other nations are having difficulty, and I really like the way Stephen talked about designating and then inviting partnership. That's certainly something I need to think about. But here in Taku territory, we've been engaged in G2G planning for a number of years. We have a good relationship with the province. And we didn't achieve everything we wanted to in our planning process with them. And so we really see the IPCA as an opportunity to continue to protect land that our people have told us to protect. And part of, the difficulty, like when we were in the G2G negotiations and talking about the provincial legislation, I was always able to say to our members, because we don't have a treaty, our nation doesn't have a treaty, we'll deal with the ownership stuff at treaty. And now with the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas approach, I feel less like that's the answer. We need a different answer now. That was 10 and 15 years ago that answer, we'll deal with it at treaty. And so now with UNDRIP on in BC, Bill 41 has been passed. I've been away from the work for a while, so I'm not sure what our nations or the IPCA initiative is doing around working on provincial legislation. And the issue that I have the most difficulty with is ownership. That the provincial legislation says the province owns all the parks and it manages it on behalf of all the people in the province. I think that doesn't line up with Taku understanding about our rights and our title. And even what my friend, earlier was talking about Section 35 as a bridge, between our legislations. I really like that idea. but Sue Carlix wants to cross the bridge and change their legislation so that it does a better job of protecting taku. And so I just wanted to bring that into this conversation because like the bridge, you know, the bridge is there and their legislation is, it needs help. Like it needs Indigenous lens. It needs an Indigenous perspective. It needs the roots, some of the that people were talking about around our law, you know, and I just wanted to bring that into this conversation. And
Thank
is
you
there
so much.
what's going on about that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sue. Georgia, do you have something to say on this point? And then Eli?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. It's a really just such an important question and something we could talk about for a really long time. I think to your point about ownership, that's definitely one of the big barriers that in talking to a bunch of Indigenous nations across Turtle Island, face when they're thinking about this idea of dual designation. So designating IPCA under their own law and jurisdiction, and then also having some sort of crown designation layered on top of that to recognize it in Canadian law. It's an approach that some nations are interested in taking. But of course, it doesn't address the underlying ownership and title issues within Canadian law. And there are some interesting examples of how to get around that. So for example, up in Guayhanas in Haida Gwaii, their agreement for Guayhanas sets out both the Canadian federal government's understanding of their jurisdiction and the CHN, the Council of Haida Nations, understanding of their jurisdiction, and they exist side by side in the agreement. And then there's a clause that says, okay, we agree to disagree on the underlying ownership of this area, but we commit to stewarding it together. So of course it skirts the issue, but it is one approach that has already been applied and I think could extend to other areas. And then to your question about sort of legislative change within provincial law, I think there's, from talking to nations within BC, there is a considerable interest in this, in ensuring that, say, for example, the Park Act does actually align with UNDRIP, because right now there's a lot of arguments you could make to point out why the Park Act does not align with UNDRIP. And I think it's really a matter of just Indigenous nations coming together and setting the priority and recognizing that, you know, laws can be changed. They're changed all the time. And it seems like it's due time for the Park Act and other pieces of legislation to be amended, and they need to be amended alongside and co-developed alongside Indigenous nations. So again, the time for Crown governments drafting legislation on their own is also past. And yeah, I know there's a lot of Indigenous nations interested in the conversation, so maybe it's just a matter of getting together and identifying shared priorities. Thanks.
Georgia, Eli, you had something to add?
Yeah, I'll just bit of a broken record, but you know, the IISAAK OLAM Foundation participated in the BC Wildlife Forum, and you know, which to amend the you know, legislation pertaining to wildlife in the province, and you know, we felt like it was a sound investment of time. Where that's actually going to go at the end of the day, we don't know. We don't know if that's going to actually change the legislation, or if we're just kind of chasing our own tails. Like with these committees, you know, oftentimes you just get caught up in the process, and you find you know, you look back and you realize, oh, by golly, I'm just in all these committees and just, you know, going through the motions, so to speak. And but you know, and so. And, you know, are we doing it in good faith? That's a real question that we need to ask. Is there good faith at the table, and continuously testing to ensure that that good faith is there, so that it is a good investment of your time and your intellectual, emotional energy. And so, but what I do feel, and this actually came from my uncle Moses Martin, when he was our chief in 1984 and declared the Mears Island Tribal Park based in New China, law of IISAAK. And when I started doing the work in 2005 with my own nation, one of the first things he told me was, he said, Eli, if I could do one thing differently, because they shut down a whole industry. You know, they shut down. It was a significant. A lot of money was being made off of the liquidation of ancient cedar rainforests in Clayoquot Sound in the early 1980s, and he said, you know, the one thing that I would do differently is I would create an alternative first. Say, the bear teaches us in law, in natural law, the bear teaches us about boundaries for the children. Mother bear teaches us. And it is important to exercise that natural law and have boundaries about, you know, the health and well-being of your children and your grandchildren, and so on and so forth. But what are the things that we do want? So if we don't want this over here, clear-cut logging, like there's no tomorrow, what is the alternative that we could put forward? And let's be creative and work with those willing partners to create an alternative vision for abundability at the watershed level, so that you're not, otherwise, if you don't have that, you're going to be continuously, that mother bear is never going to have any rest. She's always going to be trying to defend her cubs. And so we need to actually address that problem and create compelling alternative visions for our territory, rooted in our laws and our worldview, and bridged through real reconciliation, like ethical space and two-eyed seeing.
If I could add one thing to this, the fundamental reason why we're facing climate change that's driving the UN, these nations to come up with targeted numbers to a percentage to protect each country's terrestrial lands and oceans, is the concept of ownership and dominance over the land itself. From an indigenous worldview, that's a very foreign concept. We take the position that the Creator places us in our territories, each of us, and that we have responsibility to that territories to exercise the first responsibility, as Elder Larry indicated, to ensure the continuation of life. So, from that perspective, I think the primary motivation for Indigenous nations in creating IPCA should be to exercise that responsibility. And if you want to partner with a crown jurisdiction, whether provincial or federal, or even municipal, for municipal IPCAs, is get them to agree that this area is important enough that it needs some type of protection. Agree to disagree on jurisdiction, but agree on how to exercise responsibility together to fulfill your ultimate responsibility.
Thanks, everyone. So we have about 40 minutes. I think what I want to do, we have a whole host of really good questions here. So I think what I'm going to try to do to kind of get through a few more of them is just to direct asks of individuals, and then we'll see if we can get through a few more, and then we'll start to open it up again, if that's okay with folks. So we have some specific questions. We have one, and I want to get into planning anyhow, because it's so critical, land use planning, and for both establishment as well as ongoing stewardship of IPCAs. And so there's a specific one for Copper Jack here, someone who obviously was in the webinar on land relations planning. So Joe Jack, can you provide an example of how the no voice concept has been used in land relations planning, and maybe explain what that no voice concept is, since if someone on the call wasn't in your webinar, then they would need a briefer on that. Do you have an example of that we can all hear from? I think you're muted. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I was waiting for it. Yeah, in the presentation I gave on October 22nd, I shared the model that I put together that use First Nation perspective in regards to our three main laws or codes of respect, care, share as a requisite for those participants at the round table discussing complex and sensitive issues pertaining to land. And I said that there were two other components to the model. One was no voice and the other was the knowledge stream tree. The no voice included future generations, which everybody's going to have. And it's a big law in a First Nation camp where elders would always say that, you know, this land is not our land. This land belongs to our great-grandchildren and our grandchildren. So how we treat the land, how we take care of the land is our responsibility for our grandchildren. So that is the key there in regards to no voice. And also our non-human relatives, whether it be four-legged or winged or finned or crawlies, they have to also be included as an affected party. And even Mother Earth, whether it be land or water, that they would have this right of a natural person. I also mentioned that under our treaties in the Yukon, under the UFA, Chapter 2 for boards and committees gives boards and committees the rights of a natural person. And in some countries, they are designated that right over to rivers and certain areas of land. So just following that concept and idea and a traditional law, that becomes a component or a major component in regards to the collaborative planning process in decision making. And the example I gave was that I sit in this as a TK holder and the elder in the Southern Lakes and Caribou Steering Committee, in which we're putting together a caribou management plans in Southern Yukon that would bring into question 4 small caribou, mountain caribou herds. And the biggest threat to this herds is people, because 80% of the Yukon population live in this small region that these herds inhabit. And so the model tries to address the impacts that people have there on caribou. So in our discussion, we have 9 governments: Canada, BC, Yukon, 5 affected Yukon First Nations that have treaties, and 1 Tackle River Tlingit, Northern BC. So we have nine chairs, and you have a 10th representing the caribou. And as you go around the table, every time you get to the caribou chair, and we have a picture sitting up in front of the chair, that individuals in the table would say, we feel that the caribou would say this thing to this issue that's on the table. So it's recorded and it becomes part of the decision-making process. So if it's designed that if there's ever a standoff or tie, then the input of the caribou would carry the decision. And that is just to follow the traditional practice of our Kudun long ago people, where certain elders were actually given the responsibility to speak for the affected party, in this case caribou, in this roundtable discussion of the past. And we're just bringing that up forward. So that's how the model works. As I mentioned in the presentation, I'm doing about 5 or 6, 7 different projects right now with the model in various aspects, and one of them is land use planning.
That's a great example, Joe. I appreciate that. It's a great way to kind of give voice to the voiceless, really, with an intention around that.
Yeah,
Look different in different places, I gather, but it's a good example to think with.
Yes, just to finish off here then, in regards to IPCA's presentation, I did get a bite from a young planner from Quebec, and that uses the model of healthy country planning out of Australia. So we're now in the works of putting together the land relationship model with healthy country planning. And we might be knocking on some of the IPCA doors pretty soon to offer our service in regards to this Indigenous elder-led, community-led model, which I feel is going to be very consistent with almost all the First Nations that are into land use planning. But before I leave, then, if I can just make a couple of comments, because I just wanted to be careful that, because I work with the Yukon Land Use Planning Council, which is a treaty board representing both governments and First Nations. But just for the sake of academics, maybe I'll jump into the conversation. In regards to the role of federal and provincial governments in regards to IPCAs. My thinking, being a former negotiator for about 40 years, doing treaties throughout Western Canada, my thinking is that since Canada started the initiatives in regards to Target 1 at the UN with their 7% conservation areas to be protected, Canada should be the one to take the lead in regards to dealing with the provinces. I don't think it's fair that they started this initiative and then they tell the First Nations and Indigenous peoples that you go and make the deal with the provinces. They're creating a fight. And unfortunately, because the issue is going to be ownership and title of lands, and I strongly feel that they should be the one following their fiduciary responsibility in regards to an initiative they started. UNDRIP legislation, which seemed to be a good news this morning, should be taken advantage of in regards to making that tie between this fiduciary responsibility, or even the 1763 Royal Proclamation or the 1870 Order in Council, where there were conditions placed on transfer of lands over to Canada that should be closely looked at. In regards to resurrecting some of those conditions and those laws that pertains to modern treaty making in light of reconciliation. Because unfortunately, if you look at the 1763 Royal Proclamation, good intention by the British government, however, taken full advantage of by the Canadian government, including John A. Macdonald, that used all of their authorities and powers to undermine and to assimilate First Nations and to access their lands and resources. So there may be something there in regards to resurrecting some of those old laws to see where Canada has failed intentionally in regards to this nation-to-nation relationship. Section 35 in regards to relaw would be good in the sense of the only shortcoming there is that Section 35 is within the Constitution. So if you're going to talk about relaw, where does that place in regards to the Constitution? So that'll be an interesting thing, or interesting argument to look at. In regards to IPCAs, again, it's a question from what I'm hearing here this morning is far beyond IPCAs as it stands. It has everything to do with almost like treaty making in a smaller sense. However, I strongly feel that your traditional land relationship plans or land relationship planning would be a good catalyst to place your IPCAs inside or with, because I don't know what it is like in the provinces, but land relationship plans should be based on your traditional territory. So under the treaties in the Yukon, there are 8 different planning regions. There were 2 completed, one through a court case for the Peel Watershed land use plan. So you can call that reconciliation by legislation. However, in the other 6 regions, right now, there are 6 Indigenous relationship plans or stewardship plans in the making. And because the First Nation groups felt that the treaty or the UFA does not meet their requirements under Chapter 11, land use planning. So they have gone ahead and began their own planning process, which is going to have a very big and positive effect on the treaty, because that has to be fitted into the treaty somehow. And it's going to have a big effect on the outcome. Like I said, I don't know what the situation is in the provinces. You know, do First Nations take part in regional land use planning exercises? If not, then you should begin asking the question, why not? Why not begin doing your own Indigenous relationship planning that would at least begin thinking in that light in regards to a collaborative planning process and decision making that could be helpful for everyone. And then at the end, you might have to do what the Wet'suwet'en did is put up the old blockade to not only get the attention, but also the constitutional implications of Canada actually meeting with Wet'suwet'en is now there as an acknowledgement of a traditional governance system. And if that's the case, then you may not want to be in a hurry to run towards completing a modern treaty, because modern treaties, Canada's big bottom line has always been contiguous boundary and elections, which conflicts with Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous laws. So it might be a way to maybe hesitate a bit and take a second look if modern treaties is the way to go. You may want to just retain your land and your ownership and have a different kind of relationship with Canada, rather than running in that route where at the end, contiguous boundaries creates conflicts rather than build relationships, which is the indigenous ways of governing land. So I should stop there before I get into trouble.
Thank you, Joe Jack, for all those thoughts. It's very helpful.
Okay.
So I have a host of other questions, and I just want to preempt my closing comments by saying, don't be concerned. We are going to get to these questions. If not today, then it'll help shape our winter webinar series. And certainly, I think the financing questions I'll save for that, because I'm quite certain that we'll be having a special webinar on financing. But there's a few really interesting ones here, and they change our focus a little bit. So I want to ask, I'm not sure who on the call is best positioned to answer this. I don't know if Lisa, you have some thoughts. I think Marilyn Baptiste had to leave, right? I know that she would have something to say, but or Rayanna, or someone who has a chance to speak. So what role are grandmothers and aunties playing in the creation of Indigenous-led conservation? So how have established ILC or Indigenous-led conservation efforts honored the traditional responsibilities women have to the lands and waters? And the question's being asked because it's important for many reasons, but specifically goes towards the role IPCAs and Indigenous-led conservation have in regards to murder, missing, and MMIWG in addition to really healing communities that settlor colonial patriarchal violence. So that kind of sense of what do we know already about the role that women, grandmothers and aunties in particular, have played or are playing in the formulation of some of these IPCAs. I'm looking at Lisa, since you have a few projects in your territory.
I know, I mean, it's just recently that I've even been using that term auntie, or have had that used on me in reference to me. I don't think of myself in that position typically. And it just so happens, like, I never really think about it in that context as there's a lot of Indigenous women on leading their organizations, just naturally. It has happened that way, evolved over time. Even within Nova Scotia, it was commented that initially, like maybe 10 years ago, you would see all the directors coming together from Nova Scotia. It was majority of it was men. And in our recent executive director meetings, I think with the exception of one, they were all women. So, I mean, naturally over time, like women seem to take that leadership role in our communities. And but in terms of engaging Indigenous women's and thoughts around that, the approach that we take in our communities, and I'm sure it's similar to other communities, is that we get a lot of our guidance from our communities in both the importance of what we're doing and what we should be focusing our efforts on, and how we take that approach is guided by our community. And we do engage a lot of elders, especially women too, and in that discussion. So in that way, that's how we receive our guidance. And it's balanced that way. And of course, a lot of our discussions are around, I think naturally it just becomes because it comes up a lot in our conversations in terms of the healing that needs to happen in our communities in order for us to be successfully implementing these things we want to implement in terms of governance and cultural and language and environmental management and healing the environment and healing our communities. It always seems to be central to almost every discussion we have, whether it's economic development or promoting community education and capacity and just healing. It all comes back to those core things that are concerns for our community about the lateral violence and the systemic racism our people kind of have been dealing with. Because it's always pointed out to us that it's hard for you to focus on anything. It comes to that kind of hierarchy of needs. It's like you can't focus on broader initiatives or broader discussions if you're not focused on yourself, like that you don't have those basic needs of a human that are satisfied in terms of feelings of well-being and safety and family and that kind of support, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, it's central to almost every discussion we have as First Nations people that those are issues that we need to address regardless of the conversation. And it just so happens to be IPCAs is one that talks a lot about the role IPCAs can play in providing that healing for communities. So that's central in a lot of our discussions we do talk a lot about, for example, the Glooscap IPCA. What comes up consistently and dominates a lot of the conversation is the role that area can play in revitalizing our culture and our language and provide healing. The last session we had with our community, we actually had it on site, and we began it with a lead in a discussion with one of our elders, Lawrence Wells, who actually works with the communities through NADICA, that's the Native Alcohol and Drugs, and he's a counselor. He's also happens to be one of our traditional healers, right? So he led that talk in that space of healing, and we did a healing walk before we had our engagement about what that space could be, right? So I think just having Indigenous women involved in the leadership in these organizations and actively involved in these community engagements and discussions, it just naturally emerges that those things are discussed and we look for ways to address them in through IPCAs. I don't know if that makes any sense or if I'm asking, if I'm actually answering your question. But yeah, that's how it just naturally comes out, right? If you engage community, engage the people, that comes out. There's space for that. And I see Albert wants to mention something. Albert.
Oh, you have to unmute Albert.
I also would like to add, here in Nova Scotia and in the Maritimes in general, whenever there is a need for action, when the man-made laws are set up to supersede the laws of nature, our grandmothers were the only ones brave enough to stand up and say no, even to a point. They actually sacrificed their civil liberties. They actually suffered a lot of injuries. Now, I, as a man, I feel bad. I feel ashamed, in which, you know, the most important aspect of our country had to sacrifice themselves to protect protect our mother nature more. So the power of our grandmothers here in Nova Scotia, there's no word that I can say or use to honor their determination and their resilience of sticking by the principles of who they are as Mi'kmaq women.
Well, I could say that that's my observation right across the country. Indigenous women, Indigenous communities, and women in general are leading the conservation initiatives across the world.
Thanks, Stephen. I was going to ask Rihanna and her role in RELAW, working with a lot of communities and documenting Indigenous legal protocol and so on, if this has come up in those discussions, or what her observations are on this question.
Yeah, so the idea of like the power of Indigenous women is just interconnected in all of this work. So I think it's interesting to think about like the Indigenous protected and conserved areas conversation as an opportunity, you know, to build more respectful relationships, of course, but that those relationships extend between like ourselves and the community, but then also with Crown relations, for example. So it's interesting to think about like which relationships are we talking about? And we've heard throughout the last 2 hours about like all of these different relationships with self, with our family, with community, with Crown governments, with other organizations, all of these different relationships. But I think what was so cool about that question about like aunties and grandmothers and mothers was like just thinking about how those roles kind of weave throughout all of these discussions. And I was just thinking about my own personal experience of how me being an auntie really encouraged me and inspired me to pursue my career and to voice my voice. So that kind of gives me that power, that authority, I guess, if you will, to kind of speak on behalf of myself and my people when the time is right, right? So that's where that comes from, is thinking about like my family, but also my nieces and nephews, and thinking about that future and wanting to be a good role model for them in the work that I do. So there's just like a lot of conversation happening today about, yeah, the IPCA discussion and why it's such a great opportunity to think about all of these different relationships. And it's so cool to think of how this discussion can just expand into our own lives, into our own relationships with all of these different peoples, with the land, and yeah, everything like that. But yeah, I just wanted to just really, like, some people might have a hard time following because there's a lot of Indigenous concepts organically being brought up throughout this discussion, but like that's just part of the process. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say for now, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of the people who spoke. I learned so much today in just 2 hours. It was amazing. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Rihanna, for those thoughts. I think I have time for one other quick question, and actually you provided me with a segue there at the end. And just we have a whole host of questions on sort of partnerships and NGOs and non-Indigenous organizations partnering with and their role in Indigenous-led conservation. So I was going to just ask Claire Hutton, as a member of the panel here today, to maybe talk about that a little bit in the context of Nature United. So the questions were kind of, what is the role of conservation organizations to support the advancement of Indigenous-led conservation, and sort of what's the proper protocol and practices? Like what does a good relation look like in your experience there?
Sure. Well, thanks, Robin.
Just pick a piece of that if you want.
Sure. I just said back to Robin when she'd asked if I was okay to talk, that I get ridiculously nervous when I'm put on the spot with this group for some reason. So pardon my nervousness. So I think, so as Nature United, so we're a conservation organization that works in different places across Turtle Island. And a lot of our work is in partnership with Indigenous nations. And I think one of the characteristics of that work, a kind of like a foundational piece, is us being really curious and having a really strong commitment to figuring out over time how to be a good partner. So how to be in kind of right relations and how to build respectful relationships with the folks that we work with. And so that really is kind of a process. And it takes both time and resources and energy. And so I think that's something that's a really critical part for non-Indigenous or largely non-Indigenous conservation organizations, because we have Indigenous and non-Indigenous people on staff. But I think that kind of deep commitment and inquiry about how to show up and how to stand beside and how to follow the lead of the people that we work with in order to support the authority of Indigenous peoples to manage lands and waters, which is a real focus of our work organizationally. Robin, maybe you can prompt me if you think there's something else kind of more specific to reflect on, but I do think it takes kind of humility. I think it takes humor, and I think it takes flexibility and maybe doing things in ways that as conservation organizations, we haven't always done in the past. And so it's charting a new path, and one that I feel is super important, and one that is only for the, I forget the expression, but it's partnerships based on people wanting to be in partnerships. So it's not defining or forcing or convincing or coercing or anything like that. It's finding ways to work together where people want to be working together to advance shared goals.
Yeah, I think I've heard a lot in community-based research circles, the advancing at the speed of trust was the
absolutely.
I wanted to ask maybe Stephen, Lisa, or Eli, who have partnered obviously with conservation organizations in their own territories, if they had any thoughts on that question themselves before we wrap up.
Well, I think just as a segue from Claire's statement, I think it's important to articulate the fact that the CRP itself has partnered with many of the NGOs and other universities, Indigenous communities and nations, federal and provincial territorial government departments to advance support for Indigenous leadership in IPCA creation and development. So that, we're, as a CRP, what we're trying to do is get everybody to push and pull in the same direction in support of Indigenous leadership and IPCA creations. So there's a number of NGOs that we're working with, and we can advise them. And for those Indigenous nations that have any questions about NGOs and which NGOs they should engage, please come talk to us. And based on your needs, we may be able to match you up with the right NGOs or INGOs. It could be one or more. I think once you know what you want in the community, that's the most important thing. Is what do you want? What do you need to do? And once you are ready or have declared already, that's when you start inviting partners. And partners come in different forms. It could be other Indigenous governments as advisors, NGOs. It could be provincial, federal governments, territorial governments, municipal governments. your needs and your political environment will determine that.
Thanks, Stephen. Eli, you're unmuted.
Yeah, sure. I think adopting ethical space into your, as a civil society organization, you know, like understanding ethical space and adopting it into your organizational paradigm. Because really, you know, what Dr. Reg Croshu said at the 2018 National IPCA gathering in Canmore, he said, before we can have a nation-to-nation relationship, we need to understand each other. In order to be able to understand each other, we need a knowledge systems interface. And so for Dr. Croshu, that knowledge system interface is ethical space. We're cultivating that in the CRP, and we're designing ways to support civil society organizations to also, you know, also have that in their own organizations. And I think also, you know, following in the same dance, following the leadership of Indigenous peoples, and, you know, and looking at appropriate recognition. And it's very difficult, I understand, because oftentimes people who work for civil society organizations, they have certain objectives, deliverables, deadlines, funding, like the things that are within their own funding arrangements to do their work, that they have to meet their deadlines and such. And so it's really difficult to step into a meeting with an Indigenous nation and say, blank slate, you know, well, blank slate, but you also are an employee of an organization and you have things you have to deliver on. So really cultivating that ethical space in the leadership of the organization is key. But maybe Georgia has something to say about this, because I saw her pop on the screen earlier. Are you thinking of something, Georgia? I saw you put the camera back on and this question came out.
No, I think she's good. She's not in here. She's shaking her head.
Okay.
So, Lisa, did you have a couple of quick things to say in closing before I turn over to Larry?
Yeah, I think that's good enough.
Oh, just on partnerships. Yeah. So it's interesting, this whole concept around IPCAs, because it's really given us an opportunity to kind of reevaluate our partnerships and stuff, and really look for those instances where, and reevaluate like what our expectations are in terms of partnerships. Because you and I, from the get-go, we've been very big on collaborations, very big on partnerships. And we have a lot of collaborative tables that we've established, CEPI being one of them, the Collaborative Environmental Planning Initiative. But what's interesting is now is when we talk about IPCAs for our watershed, they're very anxious to kind of be a partner in that and support that and what that might look like. But we kind of taken a little step back even from that in terms of IPCA, because we're taking this opportunity to really take to heart this concept of Indigenous-led and what that looks like, and how we want to frame our IPCA in absence of that partnership, to see what it looks like, and really use as an opportunity to advance our voice at the table in terms of developing our governing structure and developing our approaches to resource management. So we kind of set that partnership aside at the moment, initially at least, until we have a better chance to frame what it is that we want out of that partnership. So that's one thing I kind of, about the Indigenous-led piece of this IPCA. It kind of empowers you to hold it to a higher standard of what those partnerships should look like, and really look at, see what's your expectation, for example, two-eyed seeing, and what would that look like, and who are those partners that are going to be best suited to meet your desired goals and aspirations for your IPCA, right? Because it's a very hot topic right now. People are very excited, and which is great, and they all want to partner and and be on board. But it's okay to take that little step back and say, well, you know what, we're going to decide, like all those things that Stephen talks about, like, let's decide what we're looking to do first. Really get a good idea of what it is you're trying to establish and how you want to go about that. That's the part about Indigenous-led. What's your approach? How do you want to do this? And then when it makes sense, bring in your partners that are going to support that, right? So that's what we're doing for our IPCA for the Brador watershed that we're contemplating, we're discussing, we're engaging communities on what's that going to look like if that's something we want to pursue, right? So that's just one my take on like on engaging partners on that. Yeah. With the other IPC we're working on with the province for land IPCAs, it's kind of given already, we kind of agreed up front, we're going to do it in collaboration with a bunch of partners because it all came together so fast under the proposal submission. A bunch of groups jumped on board under a deadline, like all the stuff Ida was talking about. We had deadlines, we have reports that are due, and it's very constrained, but we're taking an opportunity for this other IPCA to do it differently, to really be selective in our partners.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. It's a great note to end on today. And I realize we're going to go a few minutes over, but hopefully that's okay for most of us. I do want to extend my gratitude on behalf of the CRP to all of the speakers and the partners who volunteered their time to put this dialogue together and to be here today. And a warm thank you to each and every one of you who participated and shared your questions and insights. It's very appreciative. And just a reminder to sign up for updates. And we will start crafting the next series of webinars. And so you'll get indications of when those are going to be happening in the new year. And I hope that you can join us then. And so with that, thanks to everybody. And I'd like to turn it over to Elder Larry to close us in the right way.
Oh, the slow left hand. Miigwech, Robin. I'm going to take a liberty here. I'm looking at some of these questions that we ran out of time to answer, but I really hope, and I'll do what I can to find a way to answer some of those questions. Some of them are pretty fundamental, very important in order for us to move forward. So I want to let those people who have taken the time to ask those good questions, I want to let them know that I think we're committed and we'll find a way to answer those questions. All right. And thanks to each and everyone who has participated today. I know I really enjoyed it. I more enjoyed listening to others, and there's just some really good stuff today, be it the question, be it the answer, be it just thoughts along the way. So with that, Kwekwe Kijimanado, Chimigwich, to the four directions, to the land and water that nourishes us, for the opportunity to come together, to bring our hearts and our minds and focus it in one determination to address the needs of the land, of the water, and to overcome those obstacles that sometimes seem overwhelming. But it's that heart connection, the heart of the land, the heart of the water, the heart that has come together in this circle that will find those solutions. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our ancestors for all the good work that they've done in getting us to this point. And also to thank and honor not only our children, but the unborn who are to come, and to be mindful of our love for them and our responsibilities to them. And those who reminded us of that, of those responsibilities today, I say Chimigwech. So with that, I'll pour water on our council fire and wish everyone a safe and healthy journey until we meet again. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Larry. Masi Cho. Thanks for opening and closing in a good way.
Thank you, everyone. Have
You guys, I miss you.
Yeah, I miss all you guys as well. Take care.
Everyone.
Thank you.